The beauty, the sheer grace of the melodic line of Fauré is that it doesn't have a climax to justify its incredible bridging and arching. And then the melodic line of the bass is as meaningful, beautiful, as the melodic line of the top. And that the inner voices are not fillers of harmonic arpeggiation or chordal plucking, rather they are polyphonic. They are meant to be reflective. They reflect on the incredible melodic line dialoguing with the bass line. And there are very, very many beautiful connections between the different layers, but none of them is meant to be together only as a slice of a taken harmonic chord beat. It's all delay resolutions of tensions and releases, of suspensions. They lead to another tension while another one is superimposing it. So in other words, what is incredibly unique to Fauré's expression, Fauré's signature storytelling, is that he doesn't need to bring the listener to a climax to justify the build-up of a melodic line's tension, pressure, beauty. He does have sometimes, of course, most composers do, a highlighted climax, but most of the time it's not a necessary tool to justify the arching of the long phrase. It's like a long sunset or a long sunrise, where progressively things reveal themselves or dismiss, disappear in almost unnoticed way. You feel like on a aqueduct of the Romans. No matter what kind of topography of the terrain is there, you have this exact percentage, tiny denivellation for the water to go all the way to the city from wherever the source is. And I feel like for his melodic line in analogy is the same thing. It's a very long gliding, seemingly horizontal, but not. And it's so incredible because when you play it, you feel a sense of plenitude. It's as cerebrally intense as emotionally fulfilling, and both. Often you have the one or the other, with Schoenberg or Berg, one way or the other, with many composers. This kind of austere feeling in Franck's Prelude, Chorale and Fugue, while Fauré adds to it a sense of lightness and grace, a sense of modality, a sense of pentatonic, a sense of lightness, and mostly a sense of continuous flow. Would it be of the thought or of the decorative patterns? Everything seems to be turned towards one single and marvelous expression of the graceful flow of life. I find that to be dramatic with the 6th and 7th Nocturne, even more so in the 13th Nocturne, but also in the earlier nocturnes, which are usually in a style closer to the 19th century of the pianism. But the Fauréism is not just pianism, is organ, is polyphony. Sometimes I feel like it might be better served if there was a middle pedal usage, which he didn't have. When he organizes the texture to have different layers of length. And the decorative patterns aren't lighter. They aren't less thematic. In fact, then you could think, of course, then the texture will be heavy and in a way unlistenable to, because it would be too thick. If everything in the texture has an equal importance thematically or decoratively or musically in terms of the emotional content. No, I think what is very noble in his statement is that he doesn't think like a composer to try to be this or try to be that in terms of modernity, dissonance, clashes. I think he's a true continuator of Gregorian chant and Bach chorales, put together with the sound of harp and organ combined for the resonance as well as the lightness of the texture. It's almost transparent. It's almost breathing like you can breathe in a garden and you smell the different plants or flowers. That's how the harmonies appear in Fauré's texture storytelling flow of events. Why is it difficult to play? Well, it's because everybody who tries to play thinks I'm going to reduce it to a bona fide Schubert, a bona fide Chopin, bona fide Bach, or anything, because we want to assume that because Fauré, it doesn't have, and that I regret personally, but such is the unfairness of the treatment of history for some characters of the importance of Fauré. Since he does not have that indisputed fame that carries a Mozart and a Haydn and a Beethoven, who are never compared to other composers to be justified in the choices of those who play them, because they are so big by their own that even if, like Beethoven's early Haydn period is so blatant, we don't tend to call it the Haydn period. We know it's the early Beethoven. See, it's a very semantic way to keep things in perspective. And when you play something by a lesser-known composer, I mean, Gabriel Dupont, in comparison to Fauré, is totally ignored. And Fauré is, like some composers, famous enough to those who know, and those who don't know have to compare him to somebody in order to justify their understanding of his musical language. Such is not the fate of Debussy and Ravel, paradoxically a student of Fauré, the latter one. We don't listen to Ravel saying, oh, it reminds me of... But when you hear a music that is less, let's say, imposed in a way that it's irrefutable in the musical world, then we have to always justify it by saying it reminds me of Elgar, it reminds me of Mendelssohn, it reminds me of Chopin, it reminds me of Wagner, it reminds me of Schubert, of Strauss. And perhaps it does. And it does carry nucleus portions of these musicians. After all, I don't think that even Fauré would have considered being a spontaneous generation composer who comes out of nowhere and is just an innovator. First of all, he's not an innovator. People used plagal cadences before him. People used pentatonic before him. People used melodic lines that have little arrival points through reaching highlighted moments with climaxes. No, in any case, his melodies, even taken alone in terms of the melodic material, are far from being striking alone. They're only, I think, very deeply meaningful because of the harmonization. How they're presented, highlighted, enlightened. The lights and shadows of the harmonization gives the mood of the atmosphere of the melodic lines, which taken alone don't have the same charisma as a Bellini opera melodic line that has a very simplistic accompaniment. Whenever Fauré has very complex harmonic accompaniment, in harmonic modulations, chromaticisms, or not fully chromaticism. And that's one thing that makes him so difficult to memorize, even when you know the piece and you've played it already. Because his escapes in his thought process of developing his thoughts, the the guessable patternization, for instance, chromatic scale, semitones everywhere. No, he does, but not everywhere. And just step on one semitone and all of a sudden, no, but that was a tone. In other words, you have to remember it, but you cannot guess it, and you cannot, even if you memorize it and you know it, you have to still be very careful because it's treacherous, it betrays you, it bites you. But the beauty of it, I believe, the beauty in the sense, the freshness of discovery is that every time somebody listens to his music, it's thought-provoking, you feel like there is no pattern that is constantly repeated. No echo cell or very little, but mostly no predictable pattern of development, modulation. As soon as he uses chromatic scale, it's semi-chromatic, that's how I call it. So take all these ingredients and cook a Fauré piece, it's not going to work. Why? I don't really know, except that I notice that every time I try to guess his next move, let's say at the end of the page before you turn, if you sight read, 9 out of 10, he doesn't do what you expect. He doesn't go up or he doesn't go down. He might stay there and change the harmonization under, which gives the illusion, the impression that this melodic repeated note, in fact, is blossoming in another dimension just because of the harmonic dressing. So if you don't, in real time, follow his very subtle harmonic progression, which uses a lot of common tones, a lot of opportunities to not be definingly in one tonality or another. He likes this ambiguous staying in between situations where harmonically you could be dropping this way or that way, being this way or this, in C sharp or in A, in G sharp or in A flat. And that gives a sense of flotation, of expectation, of, in a way, it gives a very much room to what he is, a very subtle storyteller in the composition and the texture of his music. Probably he is not as popular today because he demands from the listener a very active participation in terms of the intellectual and emotional capacity to build, observe, and trace the path where the piece comes from and where it goes to. And so the listener has to be so attentive to follow the trail, to be on the trail in anticipation almost, that a passive listening gets the listener lost. Okay, there is the capacity to listen to it in terms of atmosphere, arpeggios on the piano, creating a sense of roundness like the harp, resonant harmonizations. Then you have a melodic line that seems to soar in the sky, like so many, Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn, Rachmaninoff after and during. So it's not so original. Debussy, Copland, Barber. I mean, melodic lines, Saint-Saëns, the concertos, melodic lines. But probably is that fact that he has this sense of, in his musical expression, a sense of very high quality of emotional connection of the texture. It's not reserved, nor is it spilling itself openly to the audience. It's a reserved intensity with an emotional depth and an intellectual appeal. Very intelligent music. Not for the sake of it, but because somehow it makes the listener feel, and I do that when I listen to his music, a quartet, the two piano quintets or the two piano quartets, the piano trio, a lot of his chamber music as well, not only the piano music, not to mention the songs. And the requiem, or the elegy, that I become a better person having been around the Fauré piece as a listener, I feel a bit more intelligent. Perhaps it's just an illusion in my case, obviously, because that would be too much to expect, but I feel it. I feel like I've been a little bit better. I was lifted a bit higher from my human condition by this length of sound, this length of phrase that brings me to an utter horizon line that is unbelievably rewarding. And I feel like I can also soar like a bird in the sky and make that phrase that seems endless. I can do that with Brahms, I can do that with Schumann, I can do that with many composers. What I feel with Fauré is that I am not modal, I'm not totally tonal. I'm not in syncopation, but I have energy that is displaced on weak beats. I have the phrasing that brings me somewhere where it tells me, follow me, listen to me, look at this place, marvel yourself. That's what it tells me. And when I play, I feel like I'm just a transmitter of that. I'm sort of a hyphen between his musical enmarvelment and how we enmarvel ourselves listening to it. Sometimes we might even be surprised and many times also a little bit unable to understand what did we just hear. It's not because it's atonal and that is unguessable unless you study the language of the composer. No, I think even if you don't know much of the language of the composer, you feel at different layers, at different levels of intelligence, emotional capturing of the words, of the sounds that he carves like a sculptor of the soul. Ah, that would be the good one. Fauré, the sculptor of the soul. I think he connects our brain to the soul very much and very directly. Even when he doesn't try to be seductive, he doesn't try to be pleasing, he doesn't try to be entertaining, no small talk in his music. Perhaps that's why it's challenging to be listened to. Perhaps that's why it's not listened to very much. Because it demands such intelligent listening from the listener. Of course, that can be said for everything. How can you capture the complexities of Bach's contrapoint if you cannot follow the voices when you listen to them, and if you hear a combination of those that are moving compared to those that are not moving, then you belittle it, like you can do that for everything, orchestrally with the colorizations or the timbres of the instruments. But in the piano, it's shadows and lights. I find it to be Fauré to be really the man who brought intelligence and sensitivity with spiritual uplifting and a sense of lightness in the depth of his inspiration, all in one. Boy, do you hear a convinced convert, right? May I convert many through him, for him. Even in this extended slow tempo of the first long dropping phrase of long arching stretch of Gabriel Fauré's Sixth Nocturne for piano, and melodic bass line and subtle harp arpeggiation in the middle of the texture, which this way spreads and flows at the same time like some kind of depth with lightness. I cannot say it more. Naturally, for the length of sound and the connection of the phrase, you would expect a tempo which flows more. And to keep that serene feel that you're sort of gliding on top of a mirror lake surface, you can do the same and obtain the same feel of flow without asperities in an even faster tempo. You have to also listen to the melodic line of the bass. And if you listen to the accompaniment middle part of the arpeggiations of the eighth notes, you observe that he doesn't shy from having the same note, F in this case, being in accompaniment, and playing just the eighth note before the next downbeat of the melody, playing the same F. And if by any chance your A flat of the melody is too soft, and the accompaniment is not soft enough, you'll hear A, F, F, La, Fa, Fa. Oh, wrong, wrong, wrong. So with this strict voicing, you cannot miss it. And if the voicing is not strict in terms of highlighting the layer of the melody, and you play soft melody and loud arpeggios, you manage to follow it, but it's more wavy than a melodic continuous line because the arpeggiations overlap and coat it. Now, in the second section, his melodic line is in the melody of the top, soprano, in harmonic in C sharp minor after the initial D flat major, and then the left hand plays off eighth note beats, intense, not staccato, not pizzicato, just eighth notes but off the beat. So they highlight harmonically after you spoke the melodic line on each beat. And so far you can say Mozart has done that, and Chopin many times too, if not many, most of the time, so that the melody can be heard before the harmonization coats it. But here what he has, it's a string quartet texture, second violin under the melody in the right hand, a secondary voice that plays connected with ties, which became in fact their own downbeats if you take it in a not polyphony, in this case will be polyrhythmy or pulsy. and that combined with the offbeat of the eighth notes with the rest, of which the bass line has its own connected melodic line, even if it's separated by the eighth notes rests. You understand even more what I meant earlier when I said he combines intelligence, that's cerebral, with emotional, that's so much soulful, or the heart, and the aesthetic of beauty in terms of elegance. So it has depth, lightness, meaning, an expression of earnest emotion. None of these parts, even combined, are meant to be seductive directly for the audience. In the term of affect, trills, ornaments, beauty, it seems to be austere, but its beauty, its austere beauty, even enhances more the gaze, the hearing. All the senses are brought in intention. They're not just shocked and surprised by some contrasting effect. Again, no effects, continuums, either the left hand or the bottom of the right hand, and the melody. Section of the Sixth Nocturne by Fauré, he is perhaps giving in a little bit to seduction, French impressionism, symbolism, because of the same time period as the painters. Yes, I agree. It's a little bit more of a seductive, but at the same time, and there is no but, it just is. I mean, I don't have to justify it. I'm just saying that I find it very refreshing when it comes after such intensity being lived before in the earlier two sections. Of course, he could have used just the A flat and the F and the D flat, the three sounds of the D flat major triad first inversion, with a melody on the top and perhaps a bass. But he uses on the top a neighboring tone of semitone or tone. Read semitone. So he injects an unexpected pattern, as I said earlier about the chromaticism, semi-chromaticism. It's not all semitone, despite the tonality, because it sometimes also could be tone. This kind of beautiful harmonic ambiguity in which we float, we expect, we don't know where we are going. We sense some kind of shiver in the leaves on the tree by this wind that could become stronger or could be just returning to sunshine. Yes, we have the melody in C sharp minor, but in fact harmonized while playing itself in A major or another mode. While the left hand bass note, so the C major chord and the leap of the octave. And these two are incredibly complementary, because to have a melodic line with a leap of an octave usually is the center point of your expression. Here it's in the melodic line of the bass. Everything is nobly beautiful in Fauré. The harmonization, the melody, and the bass. if to follow them together and not amalgamate them into... You could, we shouldn't. It could become that by the acoustics or the resonance of the place where you play, but not in your intention, in your pedaling, subtle shivering or finger pedal, whatever you can hold, but of course many repeated notes or common tones, to maintain it like fresh water bubbling, and the melody in the bass, passing tone, semitone, minor third, surprisingly C major instead of the third degree of A major, this altered degree, and then return to the welcoming A major. So A major, flat 3, harmonically in A major with a third degree, instead of to create this atmospheric flat 3, which is a major triad of C major, and it gives a sense of change of atmosphere, color, light, shot, I don't know, tastes. It's not just a harmonic effect. I think it's to do with the way that the melodic line is untouched by the harmonic changes, as if on the ground things are happening. The melody never stops soaring. So when you have these three elements of the sections of the Fauré Sixth Nocturne, the majestic opening, the complex minor, thoughtful, the playful and enjoyable and flowing, are so many and so overlayered that you have to make a choice when you make the interpretation. Or find ways to follow the track of all of it. Highlight them so that you don't drop them, lose them. It's a lifetime to find a way to express this. In 1924, Mademoiselle Boulanger gave a conference in Rice University in Texas, and the transcript says that the purpose of this talk was to speak about modernity in French music. And we talked 24, 25, these years where Fauré was just dead in 24, dying, before when she was preparing this trip. Debussy was the innovator who had already died in 1918, in September. And Stravinsky was, since 13, the king of Paris innovation with the Rite of Spring. And so her conference of modernity in French music, and I situated in this first quarter of the 20th century, exactly when this talk occurred. She says that of the three, the innovator is Debussy, the incredibly shocking innovator is Stravinsky, in her own way. She didn't say it like that, but she says the one who is the most classic of all of them is Fauré. And she considers, and you can read it between the lines, that his non-modernity, or at least non-declaimed, declared, and postured posture of modernity is his universal timelessness. His sort of medieval, classical, baroque, modern, romantic, all of the above. And she concluded in that speech that from the three, Fauré will probably for sure remain the least popular because he'll demand the most preparation and attention from the listener to be prepared to taste the subtleties of his musical language, of his texture, of his way of constructing the thought process, of the storytelling, of any thematic material, harmonic progression, melodic line, modality, chromaticisms, or versions of therefore. And there's no need for a system in which Fauré would lock himself in order to express his statement. No more atonalism than perhaps in fact, the modality that he uses is mostly because he is a great adept of the plagal cadence without that ding tone in his theme and variations. You can hear that. You can hear that in his Seventh Nocturne. It's not a dotted rhythm. It's short, long, eighth note, quarter note. It's Lombardic but not stressed. And he writes it in very long bar lines of 8 in 8. As if by stretching the bar lines, he's giving the illusion to the visualization of the notation that the melodic line has this very large, long arch that shouldn't arch, in fact, almost, as if continuously flowing. In his last quartet. Which he never finished, and he asked my teacher to help finishing it after his death. I guess she was telling me that he was so inspired and impressed, both impressed by confusing the words, overlapping them, by Ravel's quartet while he was his student. Where he, in a way, took all the Fauréisms of the flow of the lines and the purity of the flow. Nothing is heavy and stiff and guessable, and it's all just heavenly music in the sense of pure flow, like in Paradisum of the Requiem. But that because of that, Fauré didn't write a quartet for strings until the very late of his life, because of his student writing the masterpiece quartet. That was Ravel's. So he didn't finish his, and Mademoiselle was asked to be among the few of his remaining students to complete it, if they think it's worth it. Or in his piano trio, just before that last quartet, the melody of the cello opening. intensity, with melodic beauty. It is the it's emotionally and I think humanly driven by this intensity that doesn't give in for any easy way. It holds you, it takes you, it carries you. It, as a listener, you go, where do you carry me? Where do I go? What do I discover? What do I smell? What do I see? What do I hear? How do I behave? I feel like I'm transported in an unbelievable daydream. Sorry, I choked myself trying to say it. If ever I could find the words to say it, obviously I don't need to, since he wrote the music for it. And the serene feeling in the slow movement of his trio. And in the earlier period of his, before he became deaf, like Beethoven, alas, he was is beautifully intense in its true heroism of the soul, the cello elegy. What did I tell you, right? The melodic line that arches and brings you further, the furthest, and you feel like nothing is stopping it, and the chords here are steadily repeating the harmonization. It almost sounds like organ in the ways it is, in terms of texture. And then the second phrase. It's interesting because Fauré, yes, he was my teacher's teacher, so you could think I'm biased. Perhaps I am. But in Mademoiselle Boulanger's 10 years studio, when I grew up there from age 7 to 17, I can tell you that Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, Brahms, for the classics, with Haydn and Bach, not to mention, naturally, from cantatas onwards. Fauré was part of these, nor less, nor more, but not as a French, not as a symbolist, not as an impressionist, not as any adjective or epithet. He was Fauré, and that's it. His music spoke by itself. The intensity, the emotion, the drive. You can say that for the Pathétique by Beethoven. And nobody will be surprised that you mention is dramatic and impressive. And when you say it for Fauré, it sounds like you're still trying to convince through the words of the importance of the music itself, just because of the notoriety. Even the man who wrote the Liberame from the Requiem. How about a statement? How about heroism? How about charism? And that, when he was young, he wasn't deaf yet. It was so much in him. When a human being can bring out of his own, out from his inner, this soulful intensity that talks to us directly, without any filter, decoding, tonality, modality, chromaticism, atonality, none of these apply. It's just a little of some, but mostly that intensity of the line that holds you to listen to what he's going to say in the next note. And he does the same in a very relaxed mode with the song, for instance, Moonlight. You know, Françoise Gervais studied with Mademoiselle Boulanger, and when I invited her to talk to my students at my summer academy in the late 90s, when I had opened it in French castle of Gargenville, or Bergenville, it's actually Rangiport more precisely, I asked her to tell us in her, at the time already late 80s, but this incredible flames of life in her eyes. The window of the soul is in the gaze, even if the body decays. As she held her hands and she said, "Vous savez, Fauré, c'est mon pays." Fauré is my country. And she didn't say it as a posturing gesture, as an intellectual, though she's a professor of music analysis who published many books about it. So it wasn't an analytical statement, it wasn't an intellectual statement. It was really the statement of her inner landscape of musician. How choosy, how elegant, how emotionally earnest you are when you choose to live in Fauré land. It's very not an easy country to live in. It demands the best of you constantly. Your attention, your emotion, your attention concentration, your emotional concentration, everything. But the rewards are an uplifting of the soul. Yes, you do feel more intelligent, even if it's a fake feeling, as I said earlier. Perhaps it's not the right feel, but you feel like you've breathed an ether that is of higher dimension, some kind of, it's not the erudition of the truth, it's the sense of bringing to humans a glimpse of the beauty of the gods, or something that is more eternal than us. As if his melodic phrase arched indefinitely, I cannot speak, sorry. So as the sentences of the literary style of Proust gives us a glimpse of this eternity, infinity, towards which we all, in a way, yearn towards. And which is the eternity, the fashionlessness of it. It just remains classical throughout its modernity as well. It's not about time or fashion, it's about earnest intensity of feelings. I connect like this to his music, and of course I'm biased for having studied him with my teacher who studied with him. the aesthetic of his music, the melodic bass line, the moving inner voices, the no need to bring out a melodic line reaching a climax and then dropping, though you have things like this happen in his music, but the combination of the harmonic, melodic, modal, tonal, rhythmic, pulse way of tracking his own path through the path itself is an unbelievable journey in emotional and intelligent uplifting. That I am convinced. He would delay something harmonically, melodically, and bring it to a point where something else will grow out of it, as if it blossoms with delay blossomings between the voices. This is not any of his piece, I'm just improvising on the concepts that I see through his noble behaving in the melodic lines of his polyphony, and perhaps modality in this case, or the proverbial plagal cadence, amen. I hope you will also enjoy being in his country whenever you listen or perhaps play of his music. The challenging late works when he was deaf, in terms of dissonance, consonance, that loses that concept of differentiation of tension and release. It could remain in a constant tension, like that. Not these specifically, but in that sense. And the earlier works which seem to flow directly from Chopin, like the Sixth Nocturne. But that, I think, is what makes his beauty so meaningful, that it comes from somewhere and it goes towards somewhere further, through his own path, independently of the modernisms around him, of his own students even. What a marvelous lesson for us musicians of behaving in music, in terms of the society of his voice leadings, is sort of an idealization of how the voices behave with each other, how the melodic line patrician leads the texture, the bass line sings with the melody without to compete nor to submit, and the inner harmonic motions, chordal or arpeggiated, or whichever syncopated polyphonic way, his country is a beautiful country to live in daydream land. Fauré, c'est mon pays.